But anyhow, being
Good morning. The Town of Southern Shores Council Workshop meeting for August the 17th, 2021 is now in session. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. During our moment of silence this morning, I'd like to ask that we keep the Kapanos family in our thoughts and prayers. Paul Kapanos, Leo Holland, and Bill Cogger were my early mentors in serving our community through the SSCA. Hospice is with Paul now, and his time with us is drawing to a close. Please join me in a prayer for Paul and Fran and their family. Also, I just learned this morning that another one of our residents has passed away just in the last few days. I just learned this morning that Patty Cook, another member of our long-term residents, and a very special mom and grandma and wife of L.H. Cook, passed away on the 12th of this month. Please include the Cook family in your prayers as well. Thank you. Council, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. Any further discussion? If not, I'd ask for a motion to approve. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 We have an agenda. General public comment. Has anyone signed up to speak? Thank you, Sheila. This time I'll turn the meeting over to our town manager to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Back at the first of the year, we put out requests for qualifications for a pavement condition survey and development of a capital improvement plan. The deliverables as described in that project were complete an inventory of paved streets, pavement distresses by type and magnitude, recommended maintenance activities, anticipated repair cost, and prioritized by a pavement condition rating or PCR. Then in March, we got CEPI under contract. Their scope of services included our desire to develop the condition survey and capital improvement plan. They also performed a maintenance assessment of the Chickahoe beach access parking lot, the assessment of all the town's nearly 3.7 miles of street, and also the multi-use path along NC-12. And so today we have Anthony Roper with CEPI. He's a VP and director of their asset management and maintenance program to present to you the draft findings of his study. And there's a lot of information in this report. Anthony is more than qualified to present this. He's got over 29, maybe more years of experience in this very thing, having come from the private sector, DOT, retired, and now, as I said, VP with CEPI. So I am very pleased to introduce to you Mr. Roper. Most of you probably already know. There's a long-term face around here, and let him take it from here.
Mayor Bennett, council, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
And glad to be here this morning. And so Mayor Bennett and I were reminiscing a little bit. It's been a while since I've been in this particular forum, but not a stranger to Southern Shores and I guess this area. And so I certainly first want to thank you for the opportunity to serve the town of Southern Shores, and thank you for your staff, Cliff and his team have been very cooperative, and we've had several conversations and dialogue to make sure we fully understood the town and its needs and its vision. And so hopefully what we present today will give you some things to think about and to consider. Certainly understand that these types, as I did one of these presentations last night in another town in North Carolina, and as I opened that conversation, I shared with him that asset management roadway street network is one of the largest assets that municipalities have to contend with. And so as you contend with that, there are some certainly policy implications to that. And so certainly I'll give you the technical and engineering perspective, but that doesn't discount the contribution that you have to make as council in terms of making policy decisions. And so, I mean, certainly want this to be engaging. So as I go through, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, or we'll try and talk our way through it, go from there. So we will see. All right. Let's see if we can. Okay, so I always like to start these just very quickly. I know obviously in our submittal, we told you a little bit about the company, but I kind of like to just spend about a few seconds just telling you who we are, CEPI as a company. Certainly it's a North Carolina-based firm. This is our 20th year of operation. In May of 2001, CEPI Saidi started the firm with herself and two other people, I guess as staff. And today we've grown to nearly 300. We've been as much as 375 employees. During the last year, we scaled back some, but historically only business, woman-owned business, headquarters in Raleigh. Currently, we're in the Southeast in 3 different states: North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. 3 offices in North Carolina, Charlotte, Wilmington, and Raleigh. Again, about 300 or so technical staff. So I guess I said all that to say we're kind of a strong firm that's growing and really operating the space with full consultancy engineering firm with several different practices, with the exception of geotech and structures. But really just wanted to just give you a little bit of the background of the company. Most of our business is repeat clients, so hopefully that means that we serve our clients well, and hopefully Cliff and the team will say that we handle this process professionally as well. Again, as Cliff indicated, I've been at this a while, over 30 years, and 28 of that served right here in Northeastern North Carolina in Division 1. Division engineer for a spell, division maintenance engineer for about 10 years prior to that. Been with CEPI, this is going on about 4.5 years. And some of the other key contributors on this project, Chris Corrier, Jay Thompson in particular, lots of years in this industry, in the practice. And so we think we put together a strong asset management maintenance group. That's my role. I'm the practice leader for our asset management maintenance group, and this is what we do on a day-to-day basis. Quickly now, I want to kind of just a quick overview of what the scope that we worked out with Cliff and what we worked on, and kind of the process we've gone through before we get to the details. We kicked off this project in March of this year. One of the foundational principles that I operate from is begin with the end in mind. And so I think if you understand what you're trying to accomplish at the beginning, so we spent quite a bit of time really trying to work with Cliff and the team on the goals for the project and kind of methodology and those things, and talk through that. We did the field collection, data collection starting in March, and one of the principles that we practice is, for operations like activities like this, the data is the most important part. If you get good data, you can have good results. If you have bad data, then that adversely affects everything else that happens from that point forward. So we have the folk that collect our data, our field data technicians combined have over 80 years of real world experience in maintenance and pavement maintenance in particular. And so, but even with that, we do try to come out in the field and QA, QC what they've done. Again, just to satisfy ourselves that the information they collect, the data they collect, is accurate. We collect data. There's a multitude of methodologies for doing distress determinations. We use, for this particular project, Federal Highways developed a data collection stress determination model called the LTTP, or the long-term performance pavement performance methodology. Back in the late 80s, early 90s. This is a lot of research for federal highways. And it's really the purpose of that, and I'm kind of saying this particularly for a reason, is that so as more municipalities, more entities use this methodology across the country, when we say a road is a fair pavement or a good pavement or failed pavement, there's some consistency across the country, I guess, in terms of what we're looking at. And so I want to share that. One of the distinctions of this methodology, I think, in talking with Cliff, the previous methodology was a NCDOT or ICH methodology back in the 80s, the last time I think it was rated here. And that methodology only measures the severity. Is it high? Is it medium? Is it low? The LTPP methodology, it measures severity and extent. So not only does it measure how severe is the distress, but how much of the distress is present. And that's an important distinction, because what that allows you to do is to get more granular in terms of the types of repairs that you can recommend. So if we say there's patching that's needed, we can quantify what that is more accurately than in other methodologies. And so it gives you a range of options in terms of repair scenarios that you can undertake. And so the last bit of just preliminary stats is about 36, almost 37 miles of streets in town Southern Shores. And we further subdivide that down into 162 street segments, and i.e. some roads you could go in from intersection to intersection, just really what are logical sections to rate. Of those 37 miles, it was further subdivided into 162 street segments. So now getting to some of the stats and figures. We use a 5 rating scale. Again, that can be subjective. I think in some raters use 7. I personally think that's too many. You kind of water it down, I think. At least that's my opinion. And so we use a 5 rating scale, excellent to failed. And you see the score ranges. And so I think it's important to note when you look at the ranges, score ranges, this isn't like a classroom scale. And I think the other thing to note is these are the measures of the condition and the stress of the individual street, and with the goal to kind of be able to look at entire network. And so you hear me use the term today, network versus street, a lot today. And what the goal of a paving condition survey is to give you a feel for what your network looks like. Now, I'm going to say that again, give you a feel for what your entire network as a whole. That's a distinction between looking at an individual road. Because sometimes looking at an individual road, the individual road may be excellent or it could be failed. But the question I think the policymakers have to look at is, what is the health of our entire network? And that's an important distinction, because there's network decisions that you make, and then there's individual road project decisions that you make. And those two things sometimes may not be congruent with each other. So I want to say that. So the excellent to fail 5 categories, and we rated the almost 37 miles. And you see the different scores, the different lengths in each category. So about 12% was excellent, 15% good. And the number that you'll hear me hammer upon a lot today is the 73% in the fair category, 73% fair category. And then you didn't have any in the poor or failed. And again, I realize certainly that using terms like this to evaluate roads, that is subjective. So if you live on a street and you look out the window and you see some distresses in front of your house, in your mind, that might be a poor road, or you'd like to see the road improve. And again, some of that is also a policy call that I think municipalities have to make is, what level of service do we want to offer our community, what we want that to be. But this is a measure of the distress on the network at the whole road. So when we evaluate a road, we look at the entire road. So a portion of the road has some severe distresses, but what percentage of that entire road? So if you got a road that's a mile long and is only a tenth of a mile that has some distresses, then the other 90% is in good shape. Then the overall for that road might move into the fair or higher category based on that assessment. Now, the 73% in the fair is a insignificant number, because if you kind of almost envision a seesaw, on a seesaw, it depends on which way the weight goes as to which way it goes. So that many in the fair category, some of the decisions and actions that we take will determine whether the majority of those 73 slide towards the good or excellent direction, or they continue to drift into the poor or failed category. And that's important because it is much less expensive to make repairs on roads that are in the good or excellent or fair category compared to the failed and the poor. And we'll kind of get into some numbers on the difference in that. It's dramatically more expensive to improve a road that's failed compared to maintain a road that's in fair, good, or excellent category. So you'll hear me say this as well, the intent of the strategy that we're going to present today is, how do we move those in that fair category from fair to good or excellent and keep them from going to failed or poor? And so a good cliche to remember is make the good, how do you keep the good roads good? So you do that by the right treatment on the right road at the right time. Right treatment, right road, right time. And again, you're looking at this from a network perspective, not necessarily a project perspective. And I'm taking my time here because I kind of want to set some principles that drove what we're going to present to you, and then be prepared to respond to your questions on that. Any questions about that before I move forward?
Just one. The ones that were in the excellent, were those ones that we had just done in the last, say, 5 years?
I think that'd be fair to say that if a road that had been recently touched, that's in the report you see, I think there's a description of what an excellent road is and a good road and so forth. And so I think that'd be fair to say that the excellent roads historically are roads that have been recently had some activity on it, resurface and rebuild on it.
Thank you.
What do you think is the primary driver behind such the high percentage of roads in the fair condition here in our network?
The short answer is, this is not uncommon. I was in Dunn last night, city of Dunn, and they had 67% of their roads in the fair category as well. So what that says is most municipalities don't have enough resources to maintain the road at the level that you may desire. So asphalt is like paint on a house. If you don't paint your house routinely, what happens? The paint dries, it cracks, and eventually, the longer you don't paint the house, then you get water that gets to the wood, and the wood starts to rot, and then it's much more expensive. Same principle with pavements. And so and we'll get into the distress types here shortly, but most of this fair category is related to the age of the network. The age, when was the last time it was touched? When was the last time it was treated? And so again, if you don't treat it, don't pave it regularly on a regular cycle, and you don't do other maintenance activities to it, asphalt dries out, it gets brittle, and it starts to break down. And so that's, I guess, probably a long-winded answer to your question, but and again, this is not uncommon. Just this year, we've been in the city, in town of Lake Forest, Landis, Elizabethtown, Dunn, this Pembroke here, and every one of them, I would say, almost without exception, the fair category is the predominant rating, simply because of the age of the networks.
I guess some of us would wonder why we don't have any in the poor category, because of that same reason you just referred to.
I
The
think
age and the fact that we haven't touched but just a small percentage of our total network.
So what, and again, what generally drives to the fail is not only the age, but then you get the traffic loading. And so in most municipal settings, other than, it may not be the case in Southern Shores, but school buses, trash trucks, construction equipment, loading is what impacts when you got old aging pavement, you got cracks, you get water intrusion, then you put heavy vehicles on it. It's a recipe. That's why if you notice on a lot of the freeways, if you go 64 to Raleigh or something like that, or 17, you start to see these ruttings and the road breaking down. It's because of the amount of the types of traffic compared to what you see in municipalities. And so, but again, I think the reality is just like paint. I think this is what we'll show as we go forward is over time, if you don't do anything, then you get more roads that drift into the failed and poor just because of time. Yes, sir.
I'd like to also point out somewhat of an answer to Elizabeth's question. Our road program has been going on for at least 10 years, and our focus has been on those that were in the worst shape.
Mhm.
And so, those were done first, and it may be we've just got the majority of those done now.
Yeah.
But there were some streets here that were absolutely horrible. A car would bottom out if you drove
Absolutely.
down and missed swerving around some obstructions.
This is probably a good place based on that comment to share something, an observation I've made, Cliff, is that the community here has been very engaged in terms of road and the infrastructure, which I think is important. That is not common, even though you see a lot in the fair category. It is not common, the level of engagement that's been here in Southern Shores that have led to some of the success that you're talking about, Jim. So I think the town should be commended for that, and hopefully that level of interest and engagement will stay there, and that will support some of the things we're going to recommend going forward. So let's drive a little bit further. And so this is just a map, a graphical representation of that. I think I like to show this because, again, you see that the fair is across town. I mean, you see the green is the light green, the lighter green is the good, and the dark green is excellent. And so to your point, Jim, I think those are probably roads that have been treated recently. The others, again, I really like to show this because it just shows you the magnitude of where those fair roads are, and they're across town, across the geographies of the town. Now, to dig into the distresses a little bit, the top three distresses, and if you look at that, the first one is fatigue cracking. I think some of you may know that more familiar with the term alligator cracking, and you kind of see the little web, looks like the alligator back in the picture, and see about 75% of the network had some alligator cracking at the medium and high level. And again, that's associated to a couple things. Again, age of the network, age without treatments. And then as those cracks prevail, become more prevalent, traffic and loading, they'll become issues. When, again, I'm not saying there's heavy traffic, truck traffic loads in Southern Shores, but over time, when those cracks get worse and worse, then traffic and loading does have an impact on the streets. So 75% in the medium and high in the fatigue cracking category. Then the next one is surface defects, and the picture at the top is kind of a newer pavement. The bottom half of that is what we call an oxidized pavement, and again, asphalt is a liquid. It's movable. It's bendable. It's rubber, and so over time, what happens is it dries out. That's when you start getting that grayer look. You start to see the stone exposed, and it's called a defect called oxidation. And basically, it just means that the asphalt's weathering away. It's weathering away, and over time, you get more and more rock exposed. You start rattling off. Sometimes you see the loose rock that comes over time. And then the third is transverse cracking. I think, again, you probably see that a lot. Over 85% of the network had some transverse cracking. Those are those long cracks that you see. And essentially you start getting the transverse and block cracking. You start seeing forming little block patterns. Again, the last two, the oxidation, the surface defect, and this one are really the age-related, surface-related. It's where they really become prevalent. You start seeing those. Some of the transverse or block cracking can be caused by movement of the material underneath it. You see that some in coastal communities where you have a sandy type material underneath it. As it moves, it does cause some of the asphalt to move, but typically these are age and weather related, heat, stress, different things that cause the asphalt to crack. And if you don't treat those, then it gets worse. Again, you get a crack, you get water into it, and then that's where potholes develop and things of that nature. And again, there's fuller descriptions of each of the stresses in the report that you can read and look at all the 8 types of stresses that we looked at. So what do you do about that when based on the condition rating? We developed strategies specific for Southern Shores. Again, there's all kinds of neat things to do, but you need to be able to do them in your community. Your contracting community, have a contract community that's available to do the work. It has to meet, obviously, there's some aesthetic considerations as well. Some things that may be acceptable in some communities may not be acceptable in others. So we try to be sensitive to that. And then again, if our goal in presenting this is, what can we do to impact the greatest number of roads to raise the overall network score? And so this is just a combination of treatments that do that. And so obviously roads that's excellent. There's a do nothing strategy there in the short term. Then there's preservation. How do you keep the good roads? And a lot of times this is where the biggest philosophical shift comes in. You got a road that's good, and we may be proposing to do some treatments to it. And so convincing the community that this is in our long-term best interest, sometimes that can be the most challenging conversation to have, is why are we doing treatments on good roads when I have some that are worse off? So for this, thin lift, which is basically a sand asphalt, was the recommendation. Then at the fair category, we get into minor rehabs. This is patching, mill and fill, which is mill up 2 inches and fill back the 2 inches you mill off. And then there's a fill with buildup, which is some leveling and then including some leveling and patching. And buildup is, I guess there's a couple strategies to look at in situations where you have poor subgrades. There's 2 things you can do. You can dig down into it, or you can try to build up and put more structure on top of it. And so that's one approach. Then major rehab, that's significant street repairs plus additional overlays and additional structure added. So again, similar to the minor rehab, is again, instead of digging down into poor subgrades, is putting more structure in place. And that's typically going to be on roads and we work with staff to look at what are your high volume roads, what are your major thoroughfares, and try to be sensitive to that, because you may want to put a higher level of treatment on those roads than on some of the others. And then lastly, the last category would be the reconstruction, some of the ones that you talked about where it had completely lost it. Now we got to rebuild it and build it back. And so those. And off to the right, you also see the cost, the component, the square yard cost for each of those treatment recommendations. As you can see, the more severe the repair, the higher the cost. And so again, intuitively, I hope that you see that means if we can treat roads that are in the fair to good to excellent, that's going to cost a whole lot less than if we wait till they're in the fair or the poor category. And so our recommendations are centered around, again, then this is kind of my story everywhere I go, is that we really proactively implement a pavement management system that has a mix of rehabilitation and preventative maintenance. Now, again, I think Southern Shores is a little different than most places we go to that have this mileage, in that most folk, really only offer the power bill funding. Southern Shores, again, I think because of the engagement in the community, have really been, from a funding standpoint, have been proactive in terms of trying to maintain their transport. So you have a pavement management plan. So I don't want to suggest that you don't. What we're encouraging to do is maybe diversify your treatments to utilize those funds to, again, to grow, to impact your overall network. Does that make sense? Is that clear what I'm trying to say there? And so the preservation and preventative maintenance strategy is to take the good roads, and there's some things you can do to good roads, crack seals, surface patching, and seals. And again, remember I said at the beginning, network versus individual roads, network versus individual roads. And so you don't want your network overall to drive down. That reminded me, I failed to mention something. If you, on this, you may not can see it, maybe cut off on this slide, but the overall PCI rating for your condition is 71. If you look at the whole network as a whole, is 71. So again, this is where the policy component comes in. As the council, are you satisfied with 71? Should that score, would you like to see it 75? Would you like to see it 85? And then you make the decision, the strategy decision about what to do with that. Someone may say, I want to maintain, how do I keep it like it? Don't let it go any lower. If you want to raise it, what strategy do we have to employ to raise it? Sorry, I didn't mention that when I went by the first time. And so the one way to do that is to either maintain the 71 or raise it is keep those good roads and excellent roads in those categories. And so so when you talk about maintenance activities, it's not, you're not going to take a poor road and make it excellent by crack sealing or patching, those types of things. But you can take a fair road and probably move it to a good in terms of performance. You know, you still have your aesthetic concerns and those things that come up, but that will maintain those good and excellent roads by doing some maintenance activities at the right time. The rehabilitation strategy for the poor and the fair roads is the combination of overlays and those types of things. Again, to take a fair road with an overlay, it moves it to that green one of those green categories to do that. It's kind of what you did with the poor roads. When you take a poor road that has bottomed out and you repair that, then now that moves that to the excellent category. And so what we're suggesting is that because it costs so much on the poor roads, you kind of got to blend it. If you keep focusing solely on the poor roads, then what will happen is that 73% that's in the fair category, time will eventually catch up with you and those roads will start failing. And so you have more roads failing faster than you can repair the good roads. And we can show that with statistics, with some numbers here shortly. So in talking with Cliff and others, we prepared two options. Option one was, I think your current budget, give or take, I guess at the point that we looked at it, it may have fluctuated. It may fluctuate sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. Around 675,000 was a good number to start with. This option one, when we get into that, the gore details of that is that it deals with 38 miles of road over a 10-year license, 10-year CIP. It improves the system from a 27%, and I'm gonna show this graphically in a minute, good to excellent to 53% good to excellent at the end of the 10 years. So again, today you have a 27% of your roads are good or excellent. In 10 years on the option one of the strategy that we're recommending, that 27 changes to 53. So let that sink in for a minute. And then now what you'll see graphically again, though, you still don't necessarily totally deal with your fair, and you do have some roads that start showing as poor at the end of 10 years at the current funding level. So that again gives you a place to think about what level of service we want to deliver. Option two is click on look what happens if we raise our funding level to $1 million a year after the current year that we're in. And so doing that, that includes work on 57 miles of road. It improves the system to such that 99%, almost all of your network in 10 years would be in the good to excellent category. And that's important because if you're there, then that means going forward that you can start doing more of these preservation, preventative activities and less of the rehab activities. So, okay. And so to deploy that, obviously you've had a current strategy that you're using. So one of the things we also recommend is to sit down with your contractor community and say, because one thing that contractors like, I know Matt said he's a builder, and so is you like predictability. You like to know that how many houses or how many roads that I'm gonna have each year in the town of Southern Shores. And so if we can sit down with them and say, here's what the 10-year forecast look like for whether it be patching, whether it be resurfacing, whether it be milling and filling, whether it be full depth rebuilds, and they kind of got a picture of that, then it helps them plan as they try to incorporate your work with DOT and the other private sector clients. It kind of gives them more predictability, which impacts your cost. It impacts their preparation. It impacts your competition when you can lay that picture out there. The other thing we look at to, again, get the best results is there are some contract preparation and construction management techniques that you can deploy to make sure that you get the results you're looking for. For example, one of the things that because you have poor subgrades, there's two strategies. One, you can go in and try to what I call overwhelm it with strength, and that is we're just going to try to dig our way out of it and replace our poor subgrades with good subgrades and call it good. That's great, but it's very expensive. So the other way is most of these roads, a lot of these roads are going to be loaded at the time that you're resurfacing. The asphalt trucks, when you're backing driving an asphalt truck, loaded asphalt truck down, it might be the biggest load some of these roads chase. So there's things you can do contractually to mitigate that. Reduce loads, sequence of work, how they work on it. Don't allow the loaded truck to drive on the section that's been milled, for instance. So there's some things you can do creatively with your contracts that can mitigate some of the risk to that. And so certainly that's something else we ask you to recommend that you look at. And then the other thing is you need to monitor what you're doing. How is the treatments that we're putting in, are they performing at the level that we expect? And if they're not, then you make adjustments and you don't wait through the full 10 years. You want to look at it sometime, some interval in between to make sure. And I'll get into some of that shortly. Any questions about any of these recommendations?
No, at this time.
So that's kind of, so what's the impact? What does that look like? So again, the option one was the $675 a year. So we did a plan, 10-year plan based on spending $675,000 per year beginning in 2021. And so you see, I think the first half, you see the treatments and you see how much we're spending in those categories in each of the years. In year 2021, we proposed a patching. And again, I'll show this graphically. And the thought behind that is, again, remember I said, again, if you think about the network, how do you keep those fair roads from drifting to the poor or failed? Is to really come in and do some short-term interim maintenance measures that stabilizes the roads and then transition to some of the overlays and those things. Now, we said, again, if you focus on the network, and I don't think I had the graphic in the presentation, but in conversations with Cliff and the team, we showed a graph. If the council just said, in the next 5 years, you're not going to do anything but maintenance, your current score would, if you just did maintenance, you could raise that score 5 to 7 points just by your overall network, just by doing maintenance activities. And so that's one of the reasons that we really want to focus on the maintenance. So that stabilizes, and then you start doing the overlays and those things going forward.
Mr. Roper?
Yes.
I have a quick question for you. When your fifth category down, when you talk about rehab with major buildup, is that, maybe my question is more to our town engineer, is that what Joe, you have been calling full depth rebuild.
Yeah. So what we're saying there is, you remember I said there's two ways to approach when you have less than ideal subgrade. What you've historically done is a full depth rebuild where you've gone in, and Joe can give me the particulars. You remove the asphalt surface, you dug down 10, whatever, 6-8 inches, replace that with stone or some type of base material, compacted that, and then come back with typical 2 inch
Okay.
geofat. And so
Okay.
what we're suggesting is mill off the asphalt and then come back with 2 to 4 or 5 inches of asphalt on top of that. So you wouldn't go down into the subbase, you would kind of build more structure on top of it.
Okay. Understood now. Thank you.
So looking at that by miles treated, again, in option 1, just by doing patching, there was significant patching that was required across town. So you would touch practically about 6.7 miles in the first year, and it would be varying. So the bottom line is that over the 10 years, you touch about the entire network in the 10 years, or about 3.7 miles per year. By contrast, I think, again, Cliff and Joe can keep me honest on this, I think you're touching about a half a mile or less a year currently. So under this strategy, you would touch about 3.7 miles. So about 10 times more that you would impact each year. And again, the reality is and it's probably the first time I've used this term, but in asset management, it's a risk-based. What trade-offs are you willing to make? And so if the goal is touch more of the network, so you want to keep it good, keep the good roads good, then you got to touch more roads more frequently. So under this approach, you touch roads more frequently, which means that because you again, not making a value judgment, but when you're doing 0.3 to half a mile a year, and you're doing a full rebuild, that's probably the most conservative approach, and you got good results from that. Based on my experience and the different things I've done, I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, lived here, worked here my whole career. I think some of these diversifications of treatments allows you to get some very good results that will be sustainable and manageable over the 10 years and get some good results. And so it does introduce a little more element of risk that you may not be doing now, but I think a greater risk to your network is, you get around in 10 years versus getting around in 40 years. Because again, time is not your friend. And if you don't touch roads, they go from fair to poor to fail, and it costs you more money. So unless you throw even more money at it, the roads time eventually beats you. And I'm going to show you that better graphically in a moment. Actually, I'm going to start showing to you right now. So if you look at this graph here, in the current year we're in, you see that again, the yellow is the fair. So that's about 73%. The orange and green are excellent. That's about 27% of your network. Under the plan where the brownish color is poor at the top, and you see, even with this 675 a year, with this diversification of treatments that we're talking about, you start introducing poor into your mix. Some of those roads in the fair start drifting to poor as early as 2022. And so, and let me back up a little bit. Without getting too technical, roads, when we built this capital plan, we factored in deterioration and performance. What that means is roads deteriorate, they're going to deteriorate. There's nothing you can do about it. If you don't treat a road, it will deteriorate at some rate. So we considered deterioration, But then we also, what's the impact of treatments? So if you get some performance bump if you patch, it's not as big as the performance bump you get if you resurface or if you do the full rebuild, that's some of the other treatments. So to Jim's point earlier, that the roads that you saw that were excellent or good were roads that have been recently rehabbed. So you got a performance bump. It was poor, failed. You came in, did some maintenance activity, and you got a performance bump up to excellent. And so what we try to do is year over year, evaluate what that deterioration and what that performance impact is based on treating. So if you treated a road, it got some performance bump in the year that you touched it. If you don't treat it, deterioration continues. That clear? And that was a graph that the last graphic I think shows, show that graphically. So, but even at the 685 level, so what that shows is at the 685 level, there's not enough funding in the program to prevent roads that are fair from going to poor over the 10-year life of the program. So if you get to year 2032, the good news is, though, you did make some impact based by diversifying your treatment, you do have impact. So if you get to the 10th year, now you see that orange and green combination, which is good and excellent. It was about 27% in the current year. By 2032, it's about 53%. So the good news is we did improve the overall health of the network because we grew the bar of good and excellent at orange and green in year 2032. We reduced and the combination of fair and poor is 47%. So down from 73% in the current year, it's gone down. But the troubling part to that is you did introduce some in the poor category. So that says that there's an opportunity maybe, can we look at how we eliminate that? Is that clear? Does that make sense?
I think so.
These next two graphs, or one at the top, is just really showing you the cost by treatments. And then at the bottom is the miles of treatment by type. And again, you see the orange, I guess. And again, that bottom graph is telling, we look at doing heavy patching in the first 2 years of the plan. Then I guess in year 2022, the darker at the top of that second bar graph there, that's showing some overlays that we start implementing. And again, you see the next 2023, 24, 25, 26, all overlays of rehabs. But by 2027, we're starting to introduce patching back in. And the reason why we're doing that is because you start to see the deterioration of the network, it starts to ramp back up. So even at the 685 level, that you couldn't prevent roads from going to poor and failed unless you started doing more patching. Now, in the report, there's some good definition there. I probably haven't done a good job to date explaining that we have three, with the staff's help, we had developed a 3-tiered class A, B, and C that based on traffic, road classification, and some other factors I can certainly look at and read those in the report. And A being, I guess, the roads that were the most significant, and kind of down to C being just regular roads and those are Anthony's words, not what's in the report, but trying to tier. So it's probably a good place to say that the PCI ratings are ratings. When you start doing the capital plans, now you have to start prioritizing. You have to start ranking and making decisions about, if two roads have the same rating, which one do you treat first? And this is where, I guess, again, those policy or local influences come in, because obviously Anthony don't live in Southern Shores. Anthony, as I used to say when I was division engineer, nobody voted for Anthony. So this is where the elected officials and communities have to engage and say, here's what's important to us and here's why. And that influences those rankings and priorities of streets. And this is the way it should be. That's it should be, some local influences there. So, but again, I think by the treatment types and where they show up, I think that informs us that, and the goal, let me say this again, the goal was the A roads is to never let those A roads go to poor or fail. And so as you're going through the plan, roads are deteriorating. And so if a road today is in the fair category and it's class A, then we attempted to not allow that road to the 10-year life of the plan to drop down to the poor or fail. And so we couldn't do that throughout the life of the plan. This is why you see some of the patching, some of the other activities come back in through the life of the plan. On option 2, this is the $1 million, again, a year plan, similar to option 1. We kind of just show the cash outlays by a treatment type throughout 10 years. Now, I wanted to get to this because I think it shows you the impact of the decisions that you make. Again, just like in option 1, in the current year to where we are today, 73% is in the fair and the yellow. In the orange and green is still at the 27%. But notice in 2032, at that funding level, but at the end of the 10 years, all of your roads are in the good or excellent category. Also notice that you don't see any poor introduced. So that means we're spending enough, you're funding enough at a high enough level that you can basically overpower the system financially such that you don't have roads that deteriorate to the poor or failed category. So I'll let that soak in for a minute. And so again, the decisions that policymakers make, they do have an impact, but also in terms of the technical piece and the plan that you and your team decide to employ. And similarly to before, cost by treatment type and cost by and miles by treatment type, similar to before. I won't spend any more time on that. And this, again, heavy maintenance focus in the first few years to try to get everything out of to protect those fair roads, and then heavy in the rehab and overlays and basically year 2025 on. And this is, again, this is option 1. If you look at these are the conditions. Remember the conditions in option 1 in year 2032. See, but today we don't have any red, which has failed on the current map. But even at the 675 funding level, in 10 years, we can't prevent some of those roads in that fair category from going to fail. And I think that's, again, as you look at your budget and decisions you're making and how I think this is probably one of the most informative pieces of information here, that at the current funding level, even with diversifying your treatment types, if it deteriorates at the rate that we're predicting, you can't prevent roads from ending up in the poor category in 10 years. And that's with doing about 3.7 miles a year touching. Today, you're touching about 0.3 to 0.5 miles a year. So again, you kind of look at the picture of kind of what happens if you keep continuing the current trajectory, kind of what happens. And I want to be clear, that's not to say that what you're currently doing is off base. It's saying that as a council and as a community, if we're looking at the entire network, how do we positively impact the network? What decisions can we make today that positively impact the network? Under option 2, again, that map looks a lot different. That's where if you spend more money, the diversification of treatments, your map looks really good in 10 years. And then what that says is, if we're here in 2032, then now those treatments get you more into the preservation and preventative. And you saw those cost differences that we said on one of those earlier slides. It's a whole different financial game when you're preserving and preventing versus when you're rehabbing. And so I'll close, at least my part of the presentation, then kind of really hopefully get to the fun stuff of answering questions, is by this, and I thought this was a good place to close. It's kind of this philosophy that I've described is going forward. And you see the asphalt at the far left side of that graphic is a freshly paved road. Even the roads that you have retreated and rehabbed. If you do nothing over time, there's a normal deterioration progression over time. And so preventative and preservation treatment says is if we can go in at certain points higher on that curve and trigger the preventative and preservation methods earlier in the process, we can keep those good roads good longer. And again, those prevention triggers those treatments are much less expensive and much less disruptive than if we wait until it gets to the point that it's failed and poor. Then we have to do rehabs. Those things are much costly. So I think this is the goal, is how do we get to a model like this where we're preventing and preserving pavements versus rehabbing pavements. That's the ultimate goal, is how do we put together a sustainable plan that preserves and prevents. Again, I obviously I'm passionate about pavements, but it's the same philosophy that you have if you have water and sewer infrastructure, if you have your facility infrastructure. If any assets you have, this is really the goal. If I'm preventing and preserving, that's much more cost effective than if I'm rehabbing. So with that, I think obviously it's a lot of information, and you can slice and dice and present in different ways. And so I think probably the most effective way we can have a conversation is I'll stop talking and let you all start asking me questions.
What's the preventive maintenance schedule? How will that work, and what does it include?
So for me, preventative maintenance is, those are the things like your patching, your crack seals, and those things. Now, again, so that prevents. So some of the things that we said in those first few years is you have some areas where you might have fatigue cracking, and it might be isolated to a few spots. So to prevent that from getting worse and spreading further down the road, you go in and you patch, you fix that, you dig that out, you fix it back, and secure that spot. If you got some of those transverse cracks, again, what kills you is when water gets down into it.
Mm-hmm.
If you already got a poor subbase, so you don't want to get wet. So you seal the cracks. That's prevention. You do those things. Now, again, I get it that crack sealing is not attractive. It's not, particularly when it's done poorly or done incorrectly. And so you may have, okay, we're going to crack seal this year, and then we're going to pave over it next year. So the strategies go hand in hand. I think the thing that I really want to emphasize is all of these strategies go hand in hand. They complement each other, supplement each other. It's not a do this and don't do anything else. It's not let's patch and patch only. That's crack seal and crack seal only. Let's use surface treatments only. It's the combination. That's why we actually dubbed the plans a mix of fixes, because it's mixing different fixes to try to diversify and use that. And you're doing some of that now. So this isn't a totally new concept. I think we're just adding more tools in the toolbox is what we're recommending.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit to your longer written narrative. And for some areas like the parking area at Chickahawk, you suggested removing the thermoplastic painting.
No, it was replace it, I think. It should have been that.
Oh, replace it.
Replace it. It's at some point you're gonna have to go back and restripe it. So you had to grind it off. You got to put the surface seal. Then you got to come put the thermoplastic back on top of it. So obviously, I think again, to me those are level service questions. I think as a community, you have to decide, okay, what level of service do you want to offer? And having a striped parking lot, that may be the level of service you want to deploy. The reality is if you stripe it in this environment, the sand eats it off, it beats it off. And so, you know, how often do you put it back? So I think those are the conversations you have to have.
Okay, it's not that thermoplastic painting has a detrimental effect on the
No.
pavement. Okay, I got it now.
Yes. Yes. And I'll go back and read that again and make sure that we're clear about what we're saying there. Let me make myself a note. And I didn't, that's a great point. I did not touch on the recommendations for the path or the parking lot, but if you want to talk about that, I'd be glad to. All right. Other questions?
I get a real quick one. The option one, year 2032 pavement conditions.
Mhm.
That tells a whole story. Is there any way that you could prepare a similar graphic if we were to proceed along our current path, half a mile a year, $10 million expenditure over 10 years? How much of this would deteriorate to poor and fair? I know that's based upon a lot of assumptions of what roads we're touching, but would that be outside your scope?
But we can work with Cliff to work that out.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you could take our CIP recommendations, just go down the list, apply the dollars to those streets, and then we would have an outlook on where we would be.
You just want to see that graphically, or?
Just that same page, but just with our current trajectory.
Okay.
So I have a question about the cost estimates and and working with our contractors. We, generally speaking, just have two contractors that submit bids. And so I guess my question is, you have been around this area a long, long time. And so using your expertise, do you think those cost estimates are for those different treatment types are realistic? And B, do you think that the two contractors that we generally have bidding on our work are capable of doing that diversification of treatments that you guys are proposing?
It's the same work that they do. So that part is not an issue. To answer your question about the cost, we did work with your staff to get some of the unit costs that you're currently using. We also, as you know, because I got, obviously DOT does a lot of similar work through the region, so we got cost information from them. And so we tried to put that in. We did put some inflation and some other factors in to kind of be able to best we can predict. Now, obviously, some of it you can't predict. I mean, if there's something crazy happens in the world that you don't anticipate, then you see that. So, but again, the types of work is the types of work that the contractors are doing. So what we're suggesting though is if they know that Southern Shores is going to spend $1 million a year or $675 a year for the next 10 years, so it's predictable. So now as they're making their forecast and plan, contractors forecast and plan work as well. So they're doing that, they can include that work in their forecast in a conjunction with everything else that they're doing. It's just been our experiences that what causes issues if you come in at the 11th hour, you put out a bid, you put some tight time frames on them and say, I want it done at the same time as the peak for the work they're doing everywhere else, then there's a cost to that business there. They'll do it, but they will make sure that, and it's not just for Southern Shores, I think it's for other clients as well. I think the more advanced notice that contractors have, the more certainty they have about the type of work and when you'll be putting it out, the more they can plan ahead, just like with anything else. I think you get the economies of scale with that. And what we've done, that may not be the case here, but what we've done in other places, and I'm careful how I say this because I know everyone doesn't have the same relationship with NCDOT that in every place. But in some places, we've been able to leverage, because obviously NCDOT does way more contracting than most municipalities. And so sometimes there's ways to leverage those relationships and those contracts. So if they're doing a $5 million contract and you're doing a $500,000 contract, then, they're going to get better unit prices because of volume than which. So if you can somehow leverage those relationships, you may be able to piggyback on some. So there's just different strategies that you need to kind of work through and do what's right for the town. Some towns don't want to take that partner with DOT path if you're doing better, because if you're doing $1 million a year, that's a substantial contract even for your local partners. And so, again, just open and being transparent about what you're doing, I think is what we encourage.
So there's been some discussion, I guess, about changing the way we do our bidding process. And can you just expand on that a little bit more?
And again, I'm not an expert on your bidding practice, but if you're doing lump sum contracts, and sometimes people ask, the work that we did for Southern Shores was a lump sum deal. So if I'm the vendor and you say, I want you to do this, then that means I have to account for risk. And so guess who you think is going to pay for that risk? To the extent practical, I'm going to pass all the risk to the owner because I'm in the business to make money. And so when you do a lump sum contract, it's the same thing there. So one of the ways you may look at is through doing unit prices and really well-defined scope and specifications that then inspect that the contract administration to make sure they're delivering what they say. So it's just been my experience that it's challenging, at least in my mind. And you can do it either way, but I think if you've got the resources to inspect the work and to really well define it, then I experience for things like paving that a unit cost approach, unit price approach is been more effective because then he pays for the asphalt he puts down. He gets paid for that. And again, that's not to say that, again, they still have that risk that they're going to bake into those unit prices, but you get more control of that. If you say, I want 2 inches of asphalt, then I get 2 inches of asphalt. If I do unit price, if he can, instead of 2 inches, if he can get down to 1.5 inches, he's just made money because he didn't have to use as much material. So again, if you got a process that you're comfortable with and you've used and it's been inspected well, then, but it's just been our experience that unit price for paving activities is more effective. It's certainly more standard, I guess, is what may be a better way to say that. That's just one end of it. I think the other piece is looking at your specifications, looking at sequence and the work. There's other pieces that go to the puzzle to define the work better for the contractor. So the more he knows about what you're expecting, then the less risk he has to try to account for in his bid.
Other questions, Council?
Just one. What would you recommend changing in our construction observation?
And it's one of the most overlooked, but I think it's one of the most critical elements to the whole process is making sure that the subgrade is prepared, that the pavement's prepared. So if you're milling, there's certain things that you want to make. So that I think you need to have an inspection on the site while the work is ongoing. So I think that needs to happen. I don't know. Again, I'm just speaking in generalities. It's not a conversation about what you're currently doing because I don't know and ask that question. But the inspector, having an experienced inspector, certified inspector, may be the most critical thing to what happens in that later. It can really affect the outcome with having the right inspector out there.
He's independent or independent of the contractor then?
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want the fox guarding the hen house. And so
Guarding the chicken house.
exactly. So it'd be independent, whether town or a third party, town staff or third party. But I think the biggest thing is their experience level and have them certified, and it's not their first rodeo when they come. Again, we like, and again, I've been at this a long time, and contractors one of the things I say, you inspect what you expect. You inspect what you expect. So if you expect a good quality product, you inspect it.
I think there's, in virtually any endeavor, there's always room for improvement, but I've always felt that our town and staff and the town engineer was doing a pretty good job of construction observation. But, okay.
Yeah, and again, if you look at the roads that you have, I didn't look at all of them, but those roads scored pretty well. And so that says that your process that you are currently doing,
Working.
it has value. I think the question though is, are we impacting enough of the network over the time? And I think that's, as I looked at that, I think that's the biggest drawback, I think, to your current approach is that you're not touching enough of your network.
So as I hear that, you're saying we should probably be obligating some more additional monies to our streets.
You do, and I think, based on my experience, that you could introduce more treatment options in that mix. Again, I grew up in Hyde County, and so you won't get in much more unstable subbase than that. And some of the things that we recommend, these are treatments that I would use in Hyde. I supervised Hyde, Terrell, and Washington as a maintenance engineer before I went to the division. And all these methodologies that I'm recommending here is things that we did there. And those roads are in good shape today. And as I told Cliff many times, this final report that you're going to get is going to have my PE seal on it. I'm very proud of my PE seal. And so I wouldn't recommend something in a community that certainly when I'm basically, this is home for me. I live right in Columbia today. So I'm right across the bridge from you. And Cliff knows how to find me, and so I'm not going to recommend something I'm embarrassed to come down here after we've done it. I feel really good about what we're saying to expand your portfolio, and then the other thing, last thing I'll say is to I think more directly address your question, is that these are based on today. You put this plan together. Each year before you put contracts, an engineer needs to look at it and validate that treatment is still valid for that road. And so it's really what's important is how much money we spend on each year. Here's the mix of fixes we're recommending, but some of that may have to get tweaked year over year. This is today. 4 years from now, a road that was another road may have jumped in terms of priority because of traffic, because of it may have deteriorated more rapidly, whatever the case may be. So the individual project level decisions still have to be made. This is just a blueprint for how we improve the network by kind of adding more solutions into your toolbox. Does that make sense?
Mr. Roper, I'd also like to highlight the fact that y'all started this in March, and here we are now in August with a finished product. From my perspective in private practice, that's like moving at warp speed. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, again, and I'm not saying it just because it's here, but I think Cliff and the team have really been engaging. That's not normal either. There's sometimes you don't have the professional staff and the interest. They kind of say do this and then come back when you're done. We've been engaged throughout the process, and which has been healthy because I think you end up with a better end product when there's engagement. And it only costs Cliff a cup of coffee for me to say that. Other questions?
Thank you.
Cliff, miss anything you want to cover?
I have a question for Cliff.
Do you want to take a break?
The option 2 matches our current street allocation for this fiscal budget year, correct? Yeah. Okay. This one. So
Council,
option 2 isn't actually proposing more money.
I would propose about a 10-minute recess.
Okay.
Back here at what,
He has
10:25.
Mark wants to.
Mark has a question if
I'm
we'll
sorry,
entertain it.
Mark. Go ahead.
Great presentation, something we really haven't seen before here. just kind of thinking, going back a few years ago, I started kind of going through the option 1, option 2 on my phone, so we'll cross out here right now. One of the things that struck me was, and I know you prefaced some of this by saying that you weren't familiar with some of the roads and how you came to it. So, for example, I think in option 1, Wax Marble, look at that, because I live on it. So you're going to have everybody's going to look at it. Sure. So I'm looking at Wax Marble, which was like years ago, number 11 in line, 8, 9, 10, 11, is now dropped to 2029 for the first book, and it's in a patch mode. And then you look at option 2, and it's back up to 2027 in a thin layer mode. Knowing the traffic that's on there every Saturday and Sunday, and even during rain days and stuff, that road is getting more deteriorated over time. And I think if we delay that, we're going to have a complete rebuild like we were talking about with some of the others. And then if you look back at some of the dead-end streets like CO's right back behind that, we're doing those ahead of the major traffic. And it seems like we want to move some of those ones over and pick up like Wax Marble, Dolphin Run, and Porpoise, knock that whole section out at one time, and then jump over here, or vice versa. So it seems to me there needs to be a little bit of a look back, look into the weeds, because that's what's the next step, is you're going to look into the weeds, because everybody's coming out of the weeds to look at this now and see what we're going to get. But there was a couple things that just kind of jumped out at me. That I don't know how we resolve that, or what the process is to resolve that.
Well, and I think, I'll apologize up front, I'll probably give a little long-winded answer, commentary to what you said. I think one of the challenges is, this is why I keep saying network versus individual road. And so, because I guarantee you there's other examples where you can go and pick out an individual road and say, this is what I know about this road. But when you look at the network, there are some goals. And so we have roads that are class A, B, and C, A being the ones that, let me find that page.
Oh, I see it there. Classification.
So the A, B, and C, traffic, presence of trucks, connectivity of the community, and resilience of the system were kind of the considerations for what got to be A, B, and C. And so when you look at a road, you also have to consider, is it an A, B, or C? And then when you look at when were treatments triggered for that road, again, if you are a class A road, we said we're not going to, during the 10-year life of the plan, we're going to try to attempt to keep our road that's from A from going to poor or fail. So so one of those A roads, and we got the list of those that I guess we'll incorporate in the plan. So if at some point it might be fair today, and at some point 5 years into the middle of the plan, it deteriorates or it drops, then we try to put some effort into getting it back to the good. So that's where you see some of that movement. I think what that highlights is if Wax Myrtle, if it was 2029 in option 1 and 2027 in option 2, then that says more money moves those roads sooner. So again, I understand the individuals look out their road and they can say, well, I'm in year 2028, and so I think my road ought to be sooner. Look at that one road and isolate it, yeah. But when you look at the concepts of what we're trying to do, then you kind of have to keep that in mind. The good news is in option 2, every road is going to get treated, I think, before we get done. So it's just a matter of when it happens. And remember I said earlier that there can be, year over year, there can be some individual decisions made. So if Wax Myrtle is deteriorating faster than what we predict, then you're not stopped, prevented from moving it earlier. I guess as long as you stay within those spending considerations.
Yeah, I was just looking at some of like the couple of dead end streets, you have three houses on it that takes the same amount of money there as it did to do Dolphin Run. And move that over as a contractor, I would want to get all three of those out of there and done and then come back to that package.
And again, just the thing about, your strategy is you put those different elements in, and just not to, hopefully this won't embarrass Cliff from his previous life when we worked with them, up there. One of the things that was important to them was when you got into a community that you touched everything in the community before you came out. So again, that's a consideration though, a policy consideration, a level of service consideration that communities consider. So, we, based on feedback and talking to that, we used the criteria that we did, but that doesn't mean that at some point, I feel good about it. But it's certainly not my call as well, not you, interject other factors in that equation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'd just like to go ahead now and just call it, thank you, Mark. Call for about a 10-minute recess. Meet back here about, was it 10:30, 10:30 or so?
10:30.
Thank you. Good, I guess. We'll reconvene the meeting. Thank you very much for giving us a break. What's your pleasure, council? Anybody have thoughts that they'd like to share with us or with the people that are here to maybe answer the questions, like David Bradley, our town manager? Cliff, did you have some thoughts you'd like to share with us? And I heard you, as part of the conversation on the porch out there, we can maybe bring that into play as well.
In thinking about what do we do now?
Yeah.
What do we do moving forward? I think there's a lot of things that you have to consider. I think you have to consider, what is being presented is just the asphalt. It's just the condition of the asphalt, the overlays and the things that are recommended are based on the street that's there. And we have some cases we're going to have to talk about things like, do we widen it? And, that's going to have an impact on the cost. Do we widen it? Is there a sidewalk component? Do we widen it so that bikes can share the shoulder of the road? We've got the project that's budgeted this year. You remember what we did was we put the budget in for Hillcrest, which was the next street on that list of priorities that the Street Improvement Committee had listed, or you have a choice. You can either do that moving forward, or you can start the process that SEPI has laid out here. There was a whole lot of things that Anthony described, and that I think it's important you hear from the town engineer and what his take and his perspective is, because he's going to have to transit. If this is the route we take, I'm not saying it is, but if this is the route we go, then he's got to transition himself into adapting to this way of doing things. And so I wonder if it would be helpful to talk about, maybe he could describe the difference in approach from how we would have addressed Hillcrest before the study, and how we would address how addressing Hillcrest based on the study, what his thoughts are and how that's impacted. Because if in year one of option one, we've got Hillcrest listed, and Hillcrest from East Dogwood to Sea Oats patching. And so if that's helpful, I think, and I don't joking.
Yeah, actually, they took it from East Dogwood all the way to back Highway 12, I think.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
But-
that's what we did, but the plan only takes it to Sea Oats.
Our plan was just to go from Hickory to Highway 12.
Right.
As I recall. You want to address that, Joe?
Well, I want to say a few things. First, I want to be very clear that I don't want to bias any decision the council makes by the process that we've had. I see a lot of value in what Anthony has brought to the table. It's very different than what the process that we've engaged in. And so, and I've tried to throughout this entire process of meeting with them is saying, tried to say, this is what we've done, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right decision for the town. If we can have the types of impact that Anthony shows in the visual presentation of, we touch more streets, we have a greater possibility or probability of keeping these roads in the fair, better, excellent condition. A couple of things that are a little tricky about moving forward that I think the council needs to be aware of are things that in the past we have engaged in. In the late 90s and early 2000s, we did unit price bidding. And the unit price bidding is as good as the preparation of the unit data, which means that things that you don't know about, like things in the subsurface, like organic compressive soil layers that you might encounter that you don't include in those unit estimates, will become unit prices. And one of the things that we learned, we did Circle Drive. We did an overlay of Circle Drive. And Circle Drive was a highly oxidized, undulating surface. And back in 1998, it was sort of difficult to calculate with all these micro undulations in the road, how much asphalt tonnage it would take to actually do what they call filling and leveling. So you've got this varied surface and you want to skim some asphalt in there to create a flat surface, then to do an overlay on that. And I think the estimates of asphalt tonnage were somewhere in the 40s, 40 tons of asphalt. We used 88 tons, and the town had to pay that difference, which was a handsome amount. So now the technology and the computer-aided drafting equipment that we have today is a lot better than we had in 1998. So the estimates can be closer. But what the town council at the time, they liked the certainty of a lump sum bid. Yes, there might be some risk that the contractor builds into it, but there's risk in either process. So you need to understand that unit price bidding can benefit the town, but if you find things that you couldn't account for example, when we do the design on Hillcrest, we hire a geotechnical firm to do design cores, and they periodically bore through the road surface to determine the thickness of the road surface, if there's any base material, and then what's below it to a certain depth. Usually 5 or 6 feet is as much as that auger hole that they can keep open. And they tell us, they give us a report, and then they make a recommendation on the road matrix. What should the base material be? What did they encounter? Should we incorporate any biaxial, triaxial geogrids to stabilize the subgrade, things of that nature? But those are periodic holes. On a 1,000-foot road, we might do 4 or 5 of them. So in between those holes, things get missed. And like when we did Mistletoe, we ran into an organic layer that was right below the asphalt surface that was a compressible soil material, and they recommended its removal. It was like 70 cubic yards. So when we encounter things like that in the unit price contract, the town is exposed to having to pay costs in addition to what they allocated or what that bid price was. Conversely, it can work the other way. When we did East Dogwood, we actually bid that through the Department of Transportation's unit bid process. And through that entire process, there were less materials used, and the town got a $30,000 amount that was recuperated by the town because they didn't have to spend it. So it can work either way, but understand that you're not going to necessarily have that solid number where you're going to say, yep, this is what we're spending on this project, because it can go either way, to your benefit or to your loss. And so there's some risk in that. And in the past, we did it that way. And then we graduated a lump sum. We've kept it at lump sum for the better part of 2 decades. Doesn't mean it's absolutely the right way to do it. Another thing to be aware of, and Anthony and I talked outside, is that what we do for construction inspection is periodic inspection by the engineer. We have a third-party geotechnical testing company come out, do the proof rolling, ABC compaction, ABC thickness, ABC gradation, asphalt thickness, optimum moisture content stone. They do that testing, concrete testing, where the contractor coordinates with our third-party contractor, and they do that geotechnical and material testing. What DOT does is they have an inspector on the job every day, all day long. They collect tickets for materials. They look at everything that's done on a daily basis. That's not something we currently engage in. I would expect that the prices of the work will go up beyond what we've experienced. So Elizabeth, you had indicated we have Fred Smith, formerly RPC, and Barnhill, our 2 bidders.
Mhm.
So we have a good handle on the prices that we expect to come from them. The engineering cost estimates that we do are pretty close to what we get in actual prices. If we're going to add to those prices an inspector that is there 40 hours a week, every day, every hour they're working, I can see that cost going up. That's Anthony's got that built into his unit prices. But when we think about all the projects that we've done and where those price ranges are coming in, that's going to add a cost to the project. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to have an inspector there all the time, because of course, as Jim said, we're always looking to improve. So maybe that is a step towards improvement, but be aware that there's a cost there that we currently don't incur with that. But that being said, I feel like there's a crossroad. Either jump into this process both feet And it's going to take it's going to take a few years to see how it's going to work out. Or we do stuff the way we have done stuff, which is one street at a time, full depth rebuild, where we control the road width, the new foundation and all that. I personally think at this point in time, you should absolutely follow the recommendation of SEPI, because I think the town needs to be able to measure the value of the dollar and how much street you can touch to see if you can improve the entire network. And I think it'll be years, 5 to 7 years into it before you'll really see that, yep, this has been a good decision, or it's been an okay decision, or it's been the wrong decision. I don't know what it's going to be, but I do think that at this point in time, the best approach would be to jump into that process. And I wanted to offer that opinion. It is very different than what we've done, but it doesn't mean it's, not a good program.
Would an inspector be involved on every project, or could that be a select, depending on loads and things of that nature?
I think it's going to be every project. What's going to be very different is, so when we do a road design today, like I said, we start with a geotechnical evaluation. They suggest a road matrix. We put together construction documents where we're basically gutting the road. We're taking it all out. We're excavating for new base material. So we're building a brand new road, and we're going to get a uniform width and a quality of that road that is going to be consistent through the length of the road. In this scope of work on a particular road, you may have patching, which in their lexicon, patching is not pothole filling. And I had a hard time getting my mind wrapped around that word patching, because patching is, to me, is like, throwing some cold patch in a hole and it's patched. In their lexicon, patching is a full depth patch. Tear it completely out and rebuild that section. So on a given road like Hillcrest, they may say, you may go along as the engineer and say, we're going to patch this 30 feet. We're going to overlay this 90 feet. We're going to patch this 100 feet. We're going to mill the next, because our geotechnical course said we had 4 inches of asphalt here. We're going to mill this to get it to be level. So the scope of the work along that section of road is going to be distinctly different every, as you go down the stationing of the road. So the documents are going to be geared to focus on that type of work schedule. And then when it's done, you're going to get a road that is a patchwork of different scopes. The idea being that might not be as clean looking as a brand new road, but it'll last you 10 or 15 years for less money, therefore bringing up the whole value of the entire network. The trickiness is, if you say, and the trickiness falls on my shoulders, is if you say we're going to patch this 30 feet and then we're going to overlay the next 100 feet, you got to be right about patching versus overlaying, because what is true of anything that's built on a foundation is the quality of the finished product is only as good as the foundation. So if you make a mistake on judgment on what's below that road and that schedule of work and where you stop it, you run the risk of having a premature failure in that area. What's important to remember is that still may be better than what it was. The other thing about this whole process is managing the expectations of the residents of the town. When we did Podeskeet Loop, there was some clay from the inside of the asphalt drum that it gloms onto the side. It's part of the aggregate mix, and the clay has an affinity for itself, and it bonds on the side of it and gets plastered on the inside of it, and it fell off into the asphalt mix. And there were little pock marks throughout the entire surface of the asphalt. Not really a structural deficiency. It's very common. I've got it on my road on Eckner Street. But people walk their dogs, they see that deficiency, and they get very alarmed that the product is somehow inferior. So part of this whole process is then, beyond the technical aspects of one approach or the other, is managing the expectations of the residents. Are they going to be satisfied with an overlay where you might see a transverse crack surface within that asphalt surface within a couple of years after that paving, where initially I would question, was that the right decision? Because the failure that's in the layer below is going to work its way up into the new surface. So those are all things that, both processes are fine. I think that the approach SEPI has presented carries your dollar further. So you got to try it. But I also think there's going to be complications along the way, whether it's unit price overages, additional costs for inspectors, managing people's expectations, that we're going to have to contend with. It's not going to be a smooth, easy process where there's no hiccups.
I think you answered most of my question on what kind of transition would take place.
Well, as far as the design work,
Yeah, I mean, if we switch the process that we're used to now,
well, so
you know,
we have,
how does that, we transition across if that's what we decide to do?
so we have Hillcrest designed from Hickory to the Coates intersection. So what? It's on paper, hadn't been done. Its estimate of that portion is $900 and some odd $1,000. You wait, orders of magnitude less than engineering costs. You're not married to that. If you're going to do this, I think you just need to jump in both feet and start with year one and not push it. This is my opinion. Not push it down the road. Like, in other words, just because Hillcrest is engineered, you don't have to go ahead and do a full depth reconstruction on Hillcrest and push this off a year. Make it 2022 to 2033 or whatever. My feeling is if you're going to do this process, is just jump in both feet and do exactly their recommendation, the roads in order of recommendation, because it's all plotted out based on the diversified scopes over the town to have the measured impact on each of the streets. We had, one resident comment about his particular street or a particular street and say, well, what about this street, and rearranging the order? To me, if we start down that road, you're going to have everybody look at their street and go, wait, I'm not till 2027. This is crazy. I think we need it. And that's part of this whole process, was to try to identify a prioritization from people that have the technical expertise to do that. We've done that. What was revealed is a completely different process than one we've embarked on. The ITRI report, we basically did full depth rebuilds based on the scores and the prioritization for the last 20 years. And it's had good impact. If you look at the map of our current conditions, almost every street that's green or dark green is a street that we rebuilt.
Yep.
The only thing that's missing are certain sections like South Dogwood by the elementary school. That's probably an excellent score, but that's grouped in with from Mallard Cove to 158. So that little section that we redid from the fire department to 158 isn't different. It's not broken out, but that section that's good does impact the entire score of that section. So there are other sections that we've done where we rebuilt and we've had great success, but I do think it's time to consider an alternative approach in order to try to lengthen the network itself. Because I think this all circles back to some work that we did to try to determine how much money and how many years it would take at our current pace to touch every street and rebuild it. And it was an obnoxious amount of money and an obnoxious amount of years. This changes that. And it's not something I think that I would have come up with myself, to be honest with you. It's their technical expertise working all the way throughout all, decades of experience. I mean, collectively, they had 120 years plus experience working in Eastern North Carolina for DOT with the budget limitations that DOT has. So if they can make it work, I think the town can as well.
Would Hillcrest be a place to start this, try this methodology?
Whatever they have a detailed schedule of roads to be done and the scope of work to be done on each road. I don't know if Hillcrest is in that first year or not.
Sure.
Thank you. And I think I want to make sure we don't compare apples and oranges. What Joe's describing, and he said he's basically rebuilding the road. That was not our scope to look at. As Clifford said, Anthony come in and develop a typical section for each road to rebuild the road, you get a different report than what I gave you. We look at the asphalt. So whether or not you, as a town, you make decisions about, I want every road 24-foot wide. I want concrete drives tied back in. I want radiuses at the intersections done. I want certain right-of-way widths from back of slope to from edge to edge. That's a different conversation than tell me the best strategy to maintain my roads. So I want to make sure that we're not talking apples and oranges. One. Second thing I'll say is that, Joe talked about the cost of geotech and those things. When I say that we looked at it, we're not devoid of those subjective geotechnical observations. Again, that road history and that road being in place, you can make some engineering judgments about the subsurface and other things and how it's going to perform just on how it's performed over time. So again, and I appreciate the effort that Joe put into having an outstanding rebuilt, reconstructed road. Great. But all I'm saying is that this is a maintenance plan that we put together, not a reconstruction plan. And so I think so where the council plays in from a level of service and strategy standpoint is, do we employ or deploy this maintenance approach that only looks at the pavement? When you start having questions about what should our standard right-of-way look like, what should our minimum pavement widths be, should we accommodate bikes and other things, that's not maintenance. And so I think we need to be clear about that. And so it's not necessarily a approach A versus approach B. It is maintenance versus reconstruction. They are not the same thing. There still may be some opportunity, maybe some roads that, again, the community makes the decision, or the council makes the decision that this road over here, we want to reconstruct it because we want bike lanes, we want curbing, we want those things. That's a different project. And I would encourage you, if you have roads like that, that you develop a CIP for construction. And you have one, this is a maintenance only approach that was the lens that we looked at. Edge of pavement to edge of pavement, across the condition of that pavement, and then how can we maximize based on those two budget scenarios where we got. So, and again, does that make sense? These are not the same conversation. What Joe is doing is not the conversation that we were responding to. I mean, obviously it's what he did. And again, the results are good. You look at the results, those roads, they perform well. But at the end of the day, it was a road that may have had one width, and he engineered it to be something else, which is certainly the prerogative that they're on. But that's construction, as he said it, versus maintenance is what we're doing. And so I wanted to put that distinction out there. So yeah, there may be more inspection that comes into play. But again, the trade-off is we may not be doing geotechnical investigations, and you're not doing surveying. So yeah, there may be a different set of costs, but there are costs related to inspecting the work and the type of project that you're doing. That's different than the engineering and design services that he's putting into a reconstruction. So those are not the same things. And so I don't know if it's fair to say it's changing approaches because of two different things two different things. One's construction, one is maintenance. And they're not the same thing.
So as I understand it, and I asked this question before, I'll use Hillcrest for an example. We've got large stretches of that road that are 14, 15 feet usable surface. That would not change if you take your methodology and come in and just repair what's there.
Yeah,
you wouldn't change the road width to make it uniformly 17 or 18 feet.
Exactly. So and again, because it's a different project. When you say we're going to widen, we can do the other things. That's a different project than what we were asked to look at. Right. So, and the other thing I want to, I guess, from clarity, is that the patching and the maintenance is only in areas that where distress was present that we're going to come in and patch. And so, and obviously, when you look at it, if I got a patch here and then 50 feet up the road, I need to do some leveling, then common sense says I level that whole entire area. I don't just patch here, then go pave, then move up and do something different 50 feet up there. I try to combine those activities where I can. So, because at the end of the day, I live in a neighborhood as well. And so I understand that you want to try to have something that's aesthetically pleasing when you get done as well. And then the other piece is the patching that's done in year one or the first few years of plan, that the overlay comes later years of the plan. So I think we need to make sure we communicate, I guess, proactively about what this is. This isn't a patch and do nothing else. It's the patch immediately to keep this road from further deteriorating, and then we'll start the overlays later in the program. So I think I just want to, get a discussion. And Joe's absolutely right that what the town's approach has been in the past was reconstructing those roads. And and there may be applications where you want to reconstruct a road, but it's because you're trying to accomplish other things. I want to widen it to accommodate pedestrians or bikes. I want to widen it because I want to improve. I want to put some ditches or drainage in. I want to widen it because I know in some cases there's some canopies and other things you may want to try to have setbacks and other things. So there's other reasons that you do construction, but we look at the asphalt only. So again, I don't think it's an apples to apples to say do this or do that because it's not the same conversation.
I'd like to mention also that what you have presented, Mr. Roper, from my perspective, is a master plan. It's a strategic plan, and it's going to be up to this town to implement that plan. I think it's chock full of good stuff. But I think the question council is going to have to wrestle with is how do we implement that plan? I personally am in favor of letting our staff and town engineer do that and get rid of some of these committees that we have, whether it's reconstituted or just volunteer. But I think that your report has got so much information in it, it's going to be very difficult to have continually changing people trying to interpret what your strategic plan is versus how we actually implement that plan. So anyway.
So if I could offer, there's a hybrid between the two. And I had the occasion to work with Pete Berkheimer. He's the engineer for the town of Killable Hills. He's an excellent engineer. And he would do the maintenance schedule item and make construction improvements at the same time. An example, we've been adding mountable curb every intersection radius to our projects to try to keep vehicles from cheating that radius and running up the edge of the pavement. So on all our new projects, we add that curb. There's nothing to say that you can't do the maintenance item that's on that schedule and add those types of improvements at the same time. Or road widening, for example. We can add 2 foot of stone shoulder to that road area and then overlay everything. So we're creating a base for the shoulder. So on Hillcrest, for example, you can do the patching work and you can get everything to the same grade, and then you can come along and excavate 2 feet of stone shoulder and then overlay that so that you have a uniform asphalt surface. The base is a patchwork of different stuff, the old road. So there's a marriage in there. The difference is it doesn't cost what's just in the maintenance. It's a hybrid it's a cross between full depth reconstruction. It's very detailed. And like I said, I work with Pete and learned a lot from him. And there is a way to do that, but it doesn't cost just what's in that. So it does change this 10-year plan. It pushes it out. So be aware that there's a myriad of possibilities here, but there's his maintenance, there's full construction, and then there's different schedules of work in between. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, I think what we're doing though is starting to get down into the details of something that we don't need to be discussing right now. I think the report is good, it's fine, but we're going to be looking to you and staff, hopefully, to start implementing. Certainly there's going to be changes, with the master plan, the strategic plan, based on some of those details. It's kind of like when I do a master plan for a park, engineers get hold of it and change it, and because they're getting into the details of the bigger picture there.
The only thing that I can say about that is that when the report's published, there's an expectation that you can achieve what's in the report. And so if you start to deviate from that, then that takes that timeline and draws it out. And it takes the value of that dollar and it doesn't necessarily achieve all those maintenance items. So yes, we're talking about minutia of engineering details, but it's important because whether it's the town council or the residents that expect something to occur according to the schedule, that the road will actually be addressed in some way by 2027. If we start doing hybrid engineering projects, that might be 2032. And so there's an expectation management element of this that I feel is important.
So I'm going to stay with this for a minute, just going to talk about it. So would Hillcrest be a hybrid possibility? In other words, would it be someplace we could start with that?
In the first year, it is just patching. It's cutting out the rot and rebuilding the rot in the street. When we go back and do the overlay is when we would have the discussion of road width and mountable curbs and all that other stuff. In the first 2 years of the proposed CIP, it is literally just cutting out the rotten wood and putting good material back in, to use another analogy. It doesn't address any of this other stuff. It's going through town. We're touching almost 6 miles in the first year of going through and addressing what is physically failed on the ground, so that vehicles can now transfer it, and that's setting it up for skimming and overlaying in the future. So, I mean, we have time if we embark upon this path, and thinking of one street or the other is sort of irrelevant. It's going through holistically through town and addressing failed portions of the roads in town. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Perfect sense.
if you look at the schedule on option 2, for instance, I mean, the whole thing is patching in the first year, and it's
Most of the projects are.
and I don't know if I'm misreading this. It's a draft report, but it's only $670,000 in that first year. Yeah. Yeah.
The biggest thing I picked up on that, what Matt is referring to, is that we're doing a shotgun approach to try and hold our own the first year. And then we start addressing the streets, so we've bought time so that more streets aren't deteriorating to the point of needing a total rebuild or whatever. So we're buying time with our first year efforts, and then we're going to proceed on. And that's the kind of master plan, so to speak, that we either need to accept that approach or reject that approach. But I think it makes a lot of sense.
Would an approach be that we take option 2, the maintenance of option 2 on the asphalt as presented, and then, town engineer looks at where we need to do the construction to add to this, particularly where the road may need to be widened. I mean, if we take the maintenance and we're going to follow this, then if there's other things like Anthony and Joe have said that need to be considered, you hadn't seen that yet. And so maybe we incorporate those into this plan with this plan being the basis, and then bring that back to you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is that workable?
So this point is, a capital plan is just that, capital plan. So it's like Class A streets, which is again the higher traffic and those things. You may look at that and again make a policy decision that we want each of these roads to be 22 foot wide, that can accommodate bikes and other things. And so there has to be a plan, some planning, funding, and estimates put together that you can fold into your CIP. So again, work with other folks that have, I guess, stormwater CIP, for instance. And so they would merge their paving CIP with their stormwater CIP. So you have the total capital plan for the life of that. So again, those are things that I think you have to look at is, are there certain roads that we want to be a certain width? And then you add that to Joe's point, you add that to kind of what we're already looking at doing. Now, obviously, you have to adjust on the cost. So if you overlay 22 foot versus 20 foot or 18, that's a different cost, but you do that up on the front end. So it's kind of what I would suggest. So I think that makes good sense. That again, if the maintenance component of that, the patching, those things in those first couple of years, there's nothing other than you saying this is what we want to do. Let's go do it. One of the advantages, David Bradley's here, is that, you know, right now, I think he's taking a fire truck approach to patching. You know, he kind of, like whack-a-mole, he chases the patches around town. Is that right? And so with this approach, you can actually put together a contractor or fund David's team to go out and do it all that's needed to keep it from getting worse. The reason he has to take the whack-a-mole approach is something, he patches a spot and that spot moves because we didn't get it all, then he has to come back. So this approach allows you to kind of maximize that maintenance effort, get that done, get behind it, hopefully stabilize things as you move forward and make, because I'm buying time, I hate to use that term buying time, but it does allow the time to do some more planning and strategy about what else do we want to accomplish and what we want to look at. You know, my opinion is that then every road probably don't need to be 22 or 24 foot wide, but those are decisions that, or level of services, you have to decide what we want our town to look like. And
Well, and I'd like to comment on that. First of all, buying time, yeah, that may not have been the best choice of words, but I'm still viewing this as a very, in the terms of static versus dynamic. You know, this is not a one-time report. You've got listed in one of your recommendations that we do a reevaluation of the streets in 5 years. And so our approach may shift a little bit at that point too, but nothing should be cast in stone that this is the only thing that we do. I mean, we need to be able to take this report and make improvements based on the overall concept of what's in the report, plus with the local knowledge of our engineers and town staff and everything. So, you know, it's, no offense, but it's not a Bible. So.
I would just add that I appreciate your presentation this morning, Anthony. It was very well done, and I think it made all of us a lot more aware of what we're dealing with. I appreciate Joe taking the time to share his thoughts with us, which, while it makes it a little more difficult to make a decision, it's still better to have that other opinion. I feel very good about the time we've spent with you this morning and Joe's contribution as well. And I want to thank you. Cliff?
Yeah, you know, this is draft report. He's got to give us the final, and, you know, we'll incorporate the map that you suggested. I think there's probably a couple adjustments that need to be done to the CIP based on the work we just did on COs. But other than that, you know, you'll have the finished product before you soon. And then, like you said, we can start to develop this CIP with the maintenance as the basis for putting that together. Because, you know, you can adopt this, but you can't fund it. You know, you can only fund it year by year. You can adopt the plan, but obviously, you know, you're only going to do what you budget to do. So I don't think there's really a whole lot of decision or anything that you have to make today. But I do think it would be helpful for us to come back with, when we bring that draft, that we take that maintenance plan and incorporate, you know, based on staff's input, Joe's input, what else needs to be considered as part of this, so that we're not, you know, I know it's all part of a plan. If we patch now and we overlay it later, and maybe it's patched now, and when we do that overlay in 4 years later, that's when we incorporate the widening. But at some point, I think we don't want to touch the street more than we have to.
I was just looking at option 1 and option 2. You get the poor start to creep up in option 1 at 675. And just as we're preparing the final report, $1 million, you got about 50-50. You're good and excellent at the end of the project. And at option 1, we got about 20% poor and roughly the same in fair. A lot of it still falls in that good territory. If we adopted some hybrid, like 800 a year is going to go towards maintenance and 200 goes towards stormwater and road improvements. Or, I mean, I'm just throwing round numbers out there, and we still target that $1 million expenditure a year. But where, if we had 800 just for maintenance, where would that end up on our good and fair ratio at 2032? I'd be curious to see that. If we had 30% excellent, 30% good, and the remainder were in the fair, you know, is that an acceptable trade-off? I think would be one final thing I would ask you all to kind of evaluate for us, if I'm communicating that clearly enough.
Yeah, I think we would have to give you the construction number, I guess. I mean, if Joe says there's $300,000 a year worth of construction, then that puts you at 700. So I guess we'd have to kind of back into that.
And all of it's planning. I mean,
Right.
it's budget. It's subject to market rates of oil and things like that.
It's
So,
not
And-
cast in granite.
And it may be that in 1 year, we need $500,000 worth of maintenance. So we just have to drop back to build a fund
yeah.
to do $1.5 million one of those years.
And Matt, I think realistically, that's what most folks do, is they say 10% of, it's a threshold for preservation for preventative, it's a threshold for rehab, and those types of things. And so you can do those tier approaches. So that's why you think, if you read the report, we have 2 tiers. It's really the preservation and the rehab. The construction of the third piece to that you all talking about. You certainly can divide the funds up that way. It can.
Okay.
Yeah.
The stormwater part of it is probably more important to me personally than road width and some of the other elements. It's the stormwater management as conditions worsen.
I do think overall, though, if we're going to touch a road, you need to take care of the width issue just for safety's sake. So 2 vehicles can pass each other without fear of hitting.
I agree. I'm
Okay,
just,
at
it's
a
just
minimum.
subjective. I pull
At
a
a
truck and a
minimum.
trailer through town.
And
I
if you're
haven't
going to
been able
touch a
to-
road and it's got a significant stormwater issue, there's one near me, then we would be remiss if we don't go ahead and fix the stormwater problem while we're maintaining the road. I mean, I just think that makes sense. If you're going to touch a road, do what you need to do while you're there so that the people who live there see that you're going to take care of the majority of the problems with one pass, so to speak.
It's not, we don't end up inconveniencing them.
That
By
just,
different
that just
projects.
makes sense, both for efficiency and for, as Joe would say, expectations.
The only comment I'll say to that is I've lived through this for the last 30+ years, is I do think there are separate CIPs for that. Because one is maintenance and one is not. And so you almost need to identify the roads that you're going to, you got roads that are too narrow, and you want to widen them to a certain point, then that is it. That's what Joe's doing. And so you need to find what they are. You have other roads that may be fine. And so this full maintenance plan, you can implement that today. But when you start trying to blend those things together, I think the point that Joe was making earlier, when Matt said, is that what's the impact to my network overall? So the goal is, we're at 71 today, we want to see ourselves at 80 or something higher. That's the level service of the town. When you start, every time you grow those maintenance dollars and start doing construction, you impact the length of time or the amount of money it takes you to get to that overall goal. So, and maybe that's the quality exercise that the team can look at is, of the roads we have, how many are substandard? And if it's 10 miles, if it's 5 miles, it's one thing. If it's 30 or 37 miles, that's something different. And so you got a totally different animal from what we're trying to tackle. That's my respectful opinion that when you, as a maintenance advocate, because I've been in most of my career has been in maintenance. Typically, the maintenance dollars are led away to do other things. And it's typically because widening roads, building new roads is more attractive and top of action and spin over. So what happens is the maintenance budget suffers, and then you get this deterioration that continues, and then next thing you know, you're rebuilding everything. So I would just caution that you need to really get your arms around how many roads we're talking about, how many miles that we're talking about. I totally agree with your point. If you're gonna come out and impact the road, and we know we want to provide to disrupt in neighborhoods as minimal time as you can, that's something I need. But I think that you look at the, that northwest project, you need to be careful. At least I'm not.
I hear you. Don't slip back to the way we used to do it. I get it. Yep, understand.
I think your report addressed, in cases there, the road sloped down, the ground sloped down to the street. Water could not get off the street. And I think it was a little more than 10 years ago that Coastal Studies Institute did a report because of some extreme wet summer we had. And one of their recommendations was we need to reclaim our right-of-ways. Now, we have seen up here at the corner of 158 and South Dogwood, David Bradley, you can speak to this. All it took was grading the edge of that road to get the grass level at or below slightly the road level. And that is what all it would take on a lot of our storm drainage problems. But I think Elizabeth is right also that we really need to dovetail this with our storm drainage with the road improvements also.
Anything further, council? Cliff, you have enough information to work with and you're comfortable with? Okay, if no further business, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Roper. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, staff. Thank you very much.